All right, everybody, thank you so much for coming out in the freezing cold to talk about, hey, Stacy, to talk about grief. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. It's one of my passions. It is also a great way to clear a room. Hi, I'm Laraine. I'm a grief counselor, and watch everybody leave you all the hors d'oeuvres and all of the wine as they make a break for some other space. So I kind of got into, well, not kind of, I absolutely got into this as a result of the death of my father. And my dad died when I was 19 years old. This is me and him about 1971. He had had polio as a child, and then he had a massive heart attack when he was 36. I was 8 years old, and then he died when I was 19. So the intervening years between 8 and 19 were pretty much spent with someone who was actively dying. He was no longer able to work. Our family was disrupted. We ended up moving from North Carolina to Arizona at that time. And everything sort of became marked for me around this moment. And so that's my email. Someone wants to talk to me. So what I'd like for y'all to do for just a minute is to take a second and maybe remember or take a moment to bring in someone in your world who you love, who is no longer walking with us right now, that you can kind of hold for this presentation and just kind of hang out with that individual for a moment. I am both a writer and a therapist, so you're going to get some intellectual stuff and some woo-woo stuff. So hopefully that mix will be pretty exciting. I try to bring all of who I am to everything that I do. So the first thing I want to do is define some terms. I'm going to define some terms and talk you through some of the key types of grief and ways grief gets complicated. Then I'm going to talk about how we can talk to other people about grief, how we can work with our own grief, why it's so hard for us to do this thing, and then end with a little bit more woo-woo, hopefully. So first of all, grief, bereavement, mourning, anticipatory grief, and disenfranchised grief are key terms that we throw around when we talk about grief counseling, grief therapy. Grief is the internal reaction to the loss. Bereavement, I think of bereavement like a house or like a country. Bereavement is a noun. So when a person is in a state of bereavement, they are truly entering into like a special world. If you're familiar with mythology, going from a regular world to an extraordinary world, or when you kind of get the call and you step into this really foreign place where things don't taste right and they don't look right and your memory is failing and you can't figure out what's going on and you're like shedding one skin for another skin and you're not sure what happened and you didn't sign up for this and what the heck is going on, right? So people can be in a state of bereavement for a very long time. Mourning, this is your external response to grief. So this is what other people would be perceiving. So it might be tears, it might be anger, it might be withdrawal, it might be changes in familiar patterns of behavior, something like that. So we have internal, external, state of being. Anticipatory grief, this is one of human beings' superpowers. We were just talking about this in a different context in my Psych 101 class yesterday, in the context of anticipatory stress. So anticipatory grief is the same thing. What we're doing in anticipatory grieving is we are actually rehearsing and preparing for a loss that we now know is inevitable. This is a very, very, very human thing to do. Back with my dad, so I was 8, I was the oldest. I didn't know I was doing this. I didn't know I had a name. It had a name. When I went back to graduate school for psychology, I was in my early 30s, and when I started to get the terms, suddenly I felt less messed up, right? I felt like, oh my God, there's names for this stuff. There's people who have gone through this before. I'm not this freak that's out there that wasn't able to deal with stuff, right? It was very freeing for me to have definitions, to have words. And maybe because I'm a writer, when I have a word, then I can kind of make a meaning out of it. I can make a story out of it. I can figure out how to put it in the context of who I am and how I live my life. So I started figuring out who I was going to call when my dad died at 8. So I'm sitting in my bedroom, or lying in my bedroom really, and I got my kitty cat trash can with all my Kleenex next to it and all my stuffed animals kind of lined up around me. And I'm like, okay, mom's going to be a wreck. Melanie, my sister, is younger than me, so what have I got to do? I got to call grandma and granddad. I got to call my aunt and uncle. I got to call my mother's brother and his wife. I have to call my friend. I have to figure out what I'm going to do when I'm going to miss school. I have to figure out who's going to take care of the cat. Like, I had these lists on and over and over and over in my head. And then I always knew that I would give his eulogy. And I did. Not at 8, but at 19. So I started to write it. And I would write it, and then I would practice it to, like, my stuffed animals and stuff. So I would practice it, and then I would cry. And because I'm a person who does have a little bit of a control freak tendency, there is a DSM code for that, those of you who know. I thought if I could prepare enough for this event, then when it came, I'd be able to, like, smooth sail through it, right? I'm like, I got this. I got a script. I know who I'm supposed to call. I know what's going on. Like, okay, got this. That's anticipatory grief. It doesn't work, but nonetheless we do it. It's really hard not to do it when you know that there's an impending loss coming. It's just, we're trying to figure out, it's like having a fire drill plan, you know, an evacuation route for a potential disaster is really kind of what it is. Disenfranchised grief is the grief over someone or something that is not recognized by the culture or by society. A recent example would be people who were involved in homosexual relationships and their partner died. And that loss was not recognized by many people in their culture. And there's still obviously challenges with that today, but that has come a long way. Pet loss is another interesting one that has come a long way. People, you know, it's just a dog, it's just a cat, it's just a fish, it's just a guppy, it's just a, you know, kind of whatever. Other disenfranchised grief elements are miscarriage or stillborn birth. If you look back, you know, at your own life and the losses that you've experienced, if you can maybe think of some of the categories they might fall into, that can help you look at how to better cope with what's coming. So complicated grief. So grief is the normal and natural response to a loss of any kind. Grief is normal. Grief is not a pathology. Grief is not a disease. Grief is human beings responding to what happens when something that they love has changed. That's it. So why everything has to be fine about it is really puzzling to me. And I'm going to give some more concrete reasons why I think that's going on. But grief does get its own DSM code when it falls into what's called complicated grief. And this was very much where I had fallen. I didn't know it, didn't know the term for it. Complicated grief is a grief response that's characterized by some key things. So, of course, if someone dies, right, and you had a difficult relationship with that person, you're the one who's left having to deal with the fallout of that relationship. Nothing can ever be fixed because that person is gone. So maybe a child who had an abusive parent or an absent parent or an alcoholic parent or something like that, and those issues did not get resolved in life, when death occurs, that often is going to lead someone into perhaps a stage of complicated mourning because there is not that opportunity anymore for resolution. Obsession with the dead, cynicism, there's these types of traits. Absent grief is one form of complicated grief. So this is the person who's behaving as if absolutely nothing happened at all. Everything is the same. And what that really is that's an attempt to control the environment that the individual is in. And if we can hold on and pretend that nothing is any different, then maybe nothing will be any different. So it's magical thinking, but grief is an amazing period, back to our bereavement house, of magical thinking. If any of you have read Joan Didion's prize-winning memoir, The Year of Magical Thinking, about the death of her husband, she goes into some really amazing insights about how, your logical mind goes out the window, and you start to figure out ways to make sense about things that you never would have otherwise, but they make sudden sense. It's this other world. You're in a dream space. You're in another place. Chronic grief is grief that goes on for an indefinite period of time. So I'm not going to tell you that there's a closure to any of this stuff, because that's a word that makes me super angry. There's not closure to these things. What there is a new way that human beings relate to the loss that they've experienced and integrate the new human being that they have become as a result of having lived through this life-changing experience and as a result of having loved this individual. Okay? And then delayed grief, so this is, something happens, a person goes into shock, it takes them 6 weeks, 6 months, a year to start to finally process what has happened. So we see a lot of this with sudden losses, homicide, suicide, car accidents, drug overdoses, things like that, where you had like no warning at all. And so you didn't have, so if there's like a benefit to anticipatory grief, you at least are not completely taken off guard when the loss comes. Being taken off guard when the loss comes seems to create an approximately year time span longer before an individual can begin to actively adjust to a new reality. So some of those sudden losses, like I just said, homicide, suicide, heart attack, stroke. In the Didion memoir, The Year of Magical Thinking, it was a sudden heart attack. They were having dinner and her husband just fell on the floor. That was it. Long-term illness is an example of an anticipated or unexpected loss. And generally, a person's grief responses fall into the type of loss that they've experienced. So like I said, the sudden losses tend to have more of a delayed grief response. Certainly an individual's personality, the relationship that they had with that individual that has just died, all of these things factor into a grief response as well. There is no handbook on the appropriate way to grieve. So that can cause communication challenges within relationships. So back to our terms. I don't know how I taught before PowerPoint. Back to our, I taught for like 20 years before PowerPoint. So back to our terms here. If someone in my family is mourning my father with anger, and I'm mourning with tears, and someone else is mourning by displaying no reaction at all, how might we all be making misunderstandings and misinterpretations about what we're all feeling? Right? Because nobody really wants to talk about this except me. So come talk to me. So like I said earlier, grief is the normal and natural response to a loss of any kind. So we tend to lump it in just with death. But here are things are changes. Graduations, divorces, empty nests, kids moving out of the house, a transition to parenthood, marriage, moving, a job change, an illness, an amputation, something like that. A physical life passage, such as puberty or menopause. And you could make lots of different, examples for yourself here. But these are times the world changed. And when the world changes, and we don't take time to honor what has come before, we step into what is currently happening with the unresolved business of where we've been. And so there was no class in this for me in grade school about how to deal with grief. There was no, it might have been a Mickey Mouse slideshow about something where we were stop, dropping, and rolling at the time under the tables because that was going to be useful. So, don't know that that was any more useful than a grief class. So I really want to drive home the point that grief is not a disease. If you are grieving, you are demonstrating a healthy response to love. Grief, it's a passage, it's a journey from one world to another world. Who you were before and who you are going to be are two different spaces, but in between, you're both shedding skin and growing skin at the same time. And that feels itchy as all get out, right? That doesn't feel good for many people. So think of how these are all, you graduate from high school. The person that you were, at 17, then all of a sudden, whoo, I've got to be an adult now. And oh my God, that was fast. can't wait for my kids to be out of the house. Oh my God, my kids are out of the house. What am I going to do now? Someone who's squarely right here, what happened to my body? I thought I knew what it was. Now it's doing something different. Okay. Same thing here. 2 years ago this month, I was diagnosed with colon cancer. The person that I thought I was, and where I thought I would be, and the things that I thought I would be able to do, changed literally in 10 minutes in a doctor's office. And everything that has come after that is filtered now through the lens of, I can't pretend that that didn't happen. We can't pretend that our loved one hadn't died. We can't pretend that these things didn't occur. But sometimes it feels like it's easier to do that. And when we don't have the training, I don't mean you have to go to grad school, but when we don't have the tools or the language or a space to have these kind of conversations, find ways of medicating themselves. Not always with medication, as we'll talk about. So if you are friends with or close to someone who is currently grieving, you can really be useful in a number of ways. You're the one that can kind of help watch how their behavior might be changing. Now, there's going to be obviously some behavior change because that's kind of what's going on. But look at what's familiar. What was familiar to that individual's life and lifestyle? Are there changes that have occurred long term? So not just like one day where they just ate ice cream all day, but if they ate ice cream all day for like 6 weeks, what's happening that's different, significantly different from before? STIRBS is an acronym. It stands for short-term energy relieving behavior. So some of these look like they're awesome, like exercise. Let's go exercise because we should. I'm not going to tell you not to exercise. But if you're suddenly now a manic exerciser, so exercise is, of course, releasing the happy hormone, and you're going, yay, I feel really good now. Woo, let me go some more. Ha, 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 it's all great. You're drugging yourself, right? That's exactly what you're doing. Just like if you picked up a bottle, or if you smoked meth, or if you were doing crack, or whatever it was that you were doing. This was mine, because exercise blows. And, and this was mine because I love clothes and I love shoes. But I have learned, ladies, maybe you haven't learned this yet, your feet don't stop growing. So don't invest too much in shoes before you're 40 because your feet grow a whole frickin' other size. And all your cute shoes go out the window. But so shopping. So I was 19, I was newly out of the house. So I was kind of wandering around on my own. And this was back when we had malls with stores in them. And I would go into these malls with stores in them, and I could put on different kinds of clothes, and I could become a different person by putting on a different outfit. And I could have an exchange with a real person behind the counter, and I could feel like I was a person who had somewhere to go. I could feel like I was a person who wasn't absolutely breaking apart on the inside. I could buy the right thing that fit just right, that did this whole thing. And I was part of the world I used to be a part of. And so I could pretend, I could hold to that, I could pretend. Food. Overeating, undereating, a significant change in the type of food that you eat is another sign. This was another one for me, although this one was not intentional. And I wouldn't say shopping was conscious, but it was definitely what I did. But I didn't like make a plan. Laraine, go shopping, to deal with your grief. That was not at all what I did. But when the cloud finally lifted, I was almost $50,000 in credit card debt at 23 years old, which is why I can never retire. So for me with food, so if you remember from the picture, I was born nice and round. I'm happy with the round thing. So after my dad died, though, I just quit eating. I didn't decide to quit eating. I didn't decide to lose weight. I didn't decide anything like that. But I went from a size 12 to a size 2 in about 3 months. And here's the thing with this. Nobody noticed. The attention that I got was, don't you look great? Right? Even my doctor, I finally fit in the right weight box on the chart. And he's like, Laraine, you're doing great. Same thing happened, incidentally, when I was diagnosed with cancer, and I changed food once again and did change different patterns. Go to the doctor, and they're like, oh my God, you lost 50 pounds. What are you doing? And I'm like, cancer. Don't ask that kind of question, right? But you, as the friend of a griever, can observe these things. And I'm going to help you figure out how to reach out here in a minute. Over busyness, over scheduling. This is socially acceptable. Okay. This is socially acceptable. This is socially acceptable. Becoming smaller is socially acceptable. Can't do this, I'm too busy. We love that. Okay. I did this too. I had every single minute of my day filled. Isolation. Separating from friends, family, familiar routines, right? Making snap or radical decisions, huge changes. So the recommendation is not to do anything big, like sell your house, move out of the country, change jobs, do these things in about the first year. Because you're really like us back in the beginning, in this special world, and your mind isn't firing on all synapses. It's just not working like it used to do. Some people become obsessed with the deceased and they sort of keep a room or a space completely frozen. We see this especially with parents who've lost children. So keeping mementos or keeping things, an item of clothing, an altar or something like that, and there's nothing at all wrong with that. But a room that you won't let anyone else in, that has become, a ghost room. Basically, it hasn't been touched in 20 years, 30 years, 40 years. These are clues. And more people than you would think do that, trying to hold. This is the moment when my life froze, and I can't step into this world in which this person is no longer a part. Anger, bitterness, yearning for the deceased, and then this absent, complicated, delayed grief that we've been talking about. So I don't know how well you can see this. Gary Andrews is an illustrator, and he lives in England, and his wife died suddenly. And so he decided he was going to do a doodle a day after his wife's death. And so up here, so this is him, at 1 month, grief, he's got the oppressor. So it's like this little gargoyle thing hanging on to his shoulders. At 6 months, grief is like a shadow. And then at 10 months, grief is a companion. So those are not months that need to necessarily work for you, but just a general progression of how grief feels. Overwhelming, I can't breathe, I can't see, I can't do anything. All right, everywhere I look, you're kind of there. And then, okay, I need to make friends with this new space. I need to make friends with this new bereavement world in which I find myself. I need to make an ally of the chaos before the chaos destroys me. So there's really not a right or wrong way to grieve. And so like I said a few minutes ago, because we all grieve differently, that can set up misconceptions among people who are close to one another about what should be happening. When should the funeral be? What should happen at the funeral? Because each person, so if you have a family of 6, and you got 4 kids and a mother and a father, and the father dies, each individual had a different relationship with that deceased. So you're not even grieving the same person. And I'm not a parent, but if you're a parent, you know that the person that you are with child A and the person that you are with child B, it's not like you're being inauthentic, but you connect in different ways to different people. It's not about loving one more than another, but it's about, do it with friends, like here's who I'm going to present or how I'm going to present to the world today. As in my classroom, I present like this. With my husband, I present like this. With my friends, like this. And, it's just the people, if I were to die tomorrow, the people that hopefully would miss me a little bit would all be missing different people. Grief is also a journey that you take by yourself. And this is where it gets challenging to have conversations because we can't step in and fix it. If our best friend is going through a traumatic loss or something, I can't make it better. And that flies in the face of kind of everything we're taught to do culturally. There must be an answer, there must be a pill, there must be a 6-step program, there must be something we can do to make this different, but I can't make it any different for my friend. And my friend knows it. So current grief theory, J. William Worden is the current person. There'll be a new current person in a few years, but this is the current person. The current person talks about tasks. So we're trying to, and I 100% agree with this, move away from stage models of things into just things that need to happen. Because human beings don't tend to move in a stage model of anything. Step 1, I check. I'm all complete with step 1. I'm ready to move into step 2. I'm all done with that. We're just a little bit messier than that. So if you go to a grief counselor today, and this was what I used in my practice, these are the 4 tasks that an individual, we would help them work with. So the first one, to accept the reality of the loss. So this sounds like kind of no duh, except there's a really long distance from here to here. It's a whole lot longer than the foot it actually is. And especially if the death was sudden, I mean, you're just dropped into the cold water right away, and you don't have any way to make sense out of it. So until this occurs, so this hasn't yet occurred in the house with the frozen child's bedroom. This is the part that hasn't happened yet. To work through to the pain of grief. This is to actually get you to a place, not how you're feeling like I would feel, not to where you're responding like I would respond, but to where you are actually feeling the feels, however that looks for you. So sometimes, I know in my family, this was one of the challenges for my mother, who was left with 2 children, wanting to be the one who had everything together, right? For us, that's a normal thing to do. She was parenting, she was alone, you know? So her mode was that everything was fine, and that she was gonna, and you know, God bless her, she did every single day. She got up, she went to work, she cooked for us, she picked us up from school, she was a solid rock. But we never talked about how it hurt. Ever, not once, not to this day. After all of the books I've written about it, after all of, now it's even a joke. Oh, Lorraine's talking about it again. I'm like, ugh. Okay. My stepfather went into the hospital. He's 70-something. He went into the hospital over the weekend. He had a sudden, we think it was a TIA, but we're not sure. So he was taken to the same hospital where my father died 31 years ago. And I'm talking to my mom on the phone about it. She calls, she waits to call a full 24 hours because there was nothing she could tell me. I couldn't do anything, right? So she waits to tell me. So she tells me Sunday morning, leaving the cryptic call, if you have a minute, give me a call. Which is never good when it's your mother who, you know, like, well, you know, he's in the hospital, blah, blah, blah. And I'm hearing her say the exact same stuff she said to me 30 years ago. My husband was in the room with me when this conversation was going on. We got off the phone. I'm like, God dang it, it's the same thing she's saying. She's walking the same halls where my father died. Her husband is in the same hospital. She's got a list of the medications he's on. She's got a list of all of his doctors. She's a mathematician. She's got systems, right? Her faith is in this system. But I would really like, personally, at some point in my life before my mother dies, to have a cry with her about my father. I would really like that. To adjust to an environment in which the deceased is missing. So this is what am I going to take from my earlier world and bring into my new world that's going to make it to where that individual has not, you know, they're not gone from all conscious memory. They're not, you know, I didn't dump everything out of the drawers. I didn't do that. What can I take with me that's going to help me move forward? And to emotionally relocate the deceased and move on with life. This is the hardest step for most people. So this is when you begin to open up your heart again, if it was your partner, to considering the possibility of falling in love again, if that's a truth for you. To have another child, if that's the truth for you with that. Or to just get a cat, right? To open up your heart to love something again more fully. So we really want this to happen. All right, I had an event. There will be a path, and then there will be an end point. Okay? This is learning outcome 1. I will start here. I will here, check. Griever has effectively attained the learning outcome here. But this is how it works, right? And if you've ever gone through it, it's no straight line. It's one big convoluted mess. And you're like, I'm doing good today. Oh, not today. You know, doing good today. I went out, I had coffee, saw a movie, you know, I ate something. Today I can't bring myself to get out of bed. This is much more accurate. So if you're currently in a state of active grief and you're doing this, you're on schedule with learning outcome 1. It just doesn't look like what you thought. So I think there are many more reasons than this why we don't talk about grief, but here are some of the things that I think that I've seen come up over and over and over again. A bliss junkie, spiritual bypass teaching, kind of a social societal addiction to being happy all the time. And by bliss junkie, what I mean is we're going to just transcend the muck and be just super, everything is all good. Just look on the bright side. Okay? So there is always a bright side. There is always another side. There is always a gift in the grief. There is always a grief in the tragedy. A gift in the tragedy. But when you're in the middle of it, what the person who's telling you, but look, they're taking away your right to feel. They're not meaning to. They also didn't get the how to talk to grieving people class in the 4th grade. They're not trying to do that, but they're taking that away from you. And so then you as a griever are like, not going to tell you anything anymore. Thanks, though. This idea that being happy is a pleasurable thing, that happiness equals pleasure, joy, whoo, and that if you're not happy all the time, then you've messed up life. So there's I'm going to butcher it, but there's a verse in the Tao, when the guest comes, make hot tea. When the guest leaves, throw it out. And it's referring to emotions. When an emotion arises, welcome it in, offer it a drink, tea or vodka or whatever, offer it a drink, sit with it, and when it goes, leave the door open so it can leave. If we never let the sadness in, it's going to keep knocking at the door until it eventually turns to some kind of physical pathology. Like I've said many times, we don't have tools for this. We don't know what things to say. Many of us have been culturally isolated from illness and aging and death. So a lot of people end up, putting their old people in homes, right? Isolating them. Someone dies, what happens? The funeral parlor comes in, they go down to the morgue, whatever happens, boom, boom, they're gone. They sort of look like what they used to look like, and here you go, whoop, happy day. Wasn't so long ago, right, that the dead sat in our living rooms, and the family came, and the dead were dead, and the grievers grieved. But now we go to a beige funeral parlor with piped-in music, and we have a little flexibility to write our script, but for most people it's a fairly generic event. When we can't fix what's happening, we don't know what to say. And so if I don't know what to say, I might be more inclined to say nothing, because I don't want to say the wrong thing. But if you have experienced grief in your life, you know that you have not forgotten that you are grieving. Me bringing it up is not going to be like, Oh crap, I totally forgot my dad died. Thanks. Never occurred to me. So you're not going to make the griever remember something that they forgot by talking. But I can't change, and that can be so super frustrating. I can't take it away. I can't make the dead not dead. I can't make it to where your life didn't go from this world to this world. There is, I think, a cultural resistance to death in general, and a view, especially in the medical model, of death as failing, instead of a natural part of being alive. When someone dies, they didn't do something wrong. They reached the end of the natural life cycle. When water turns to ice, turns to steam, it's not doing something wrong, it's going through the water cycle. That's what it does. This is the human life cycle. Maybe I'm going to try to talk to you about what's going on, but oh my God, it's tapping into all my unresolved grief that I haven't talked about, so yeah. Let's go shopping. Because that's cool. Our own fear of mortality. It's normal to be afraid of mortality. So I've been studying this pretty deeply for about 15 years, and when I got my cancer diagnosis, I did have tools, but it didn't make this all of a sudden any less terrifying. And I was like, oh, that difference between theory and practice, this is that. This is exactly that moment. Our own insignificance in the vast cosmos of the world, right? This often kicks in different kinds of attribution errors, cognitive biases, defense mechanisms, things like that. And even if we don't say them out loud, this is a kind of an example of how this works. So-and-so got lung cancer, but they were a smoker. I don't smoke, therefore I won't get lung cancer, which the natural conclusion to that faulty logic is that person caused their own death. If you know anything at all about the sciences, it's very difficult to prove causation, true causation. Correlation is much, much easier. But we kind of go through like, okay, I didn't behave like that, or I didn't do that, or I didn't engage in that. I'm safe. It's a way of self-protection. It's a defense mechanism to protect. But it can make us distance ourselves from our friend. This also sometimes happens, and what I mean by the griever becomes the caretaker for the person trying to help. So I'm trying to help you, I don't know what to say, so I'm saying things like, I know just how you feel. Which is a crap thing to say, which we'll get to in another slide in a minute. But then suddenly, the griever now is having to manage me. I'm not giving the griever space to grieve. I'm inserting my own self into the grieving process. So what not to say? What I just said, I know how you feel, that's called conversational narcissism. We've probably all done it. I've done it. You know, you've probably done a lot of these things that I'm going to say I have done. These things that are, if they're on this slide, I've done it. So what this person is attempting to do, right? I know how you feel, my dad died too. I think I'm trying to build a bridge, right? I think I'm trying to say, okay, I can relate to you. I can understand that you're going through this experience. This was really painful for me. But what I've done is I've redirected the conversation back to me. It's safer for me to talk about me than it is to talk about you. So that's the shift response. So here without you, like, I'm overwhelmed since Jay's death. And I'm saying, I hear you. I can't seem to find time for anything. I've redirected it back to me. Support response. I'm overwhelmed since Jay's death. How so? Can you share more about what overwhelmed feels like right now? And I know this kind of language is the language that gets mocked by therapists and psychologists all the time. So what I'm hearing you say is, or tell me what you think, da, da, da. But there's a reason we use it, because it's allowing us to give space for you to actually tell me what you're feeling, instead of me telling you how I'm feeling about what you're feeling, which is not the same thing. It's not the same thing at all. They're in a better place. Don't cry, boys, don't cry. You're the man, woman of the house. Look after your mom, dad, sister, or brother. Don't cry. Why aren't you crying? It just takes time. So if you had a flat tire when you go back out to your car today, and I told you it just takes time, the tire will reinflate eventually. You're going to freeze to death before this is over. It does not just take time. Time just passes. That's all time does. You got to work the time to see a shift. You were lucky to have them with you for a while. So these sound kind of horrible in this sort of snarky way I'm presenting them, and they are horrible, but we've probably, like I said, all said these things. I mean, I've heard many of these things, said many of these things. What this is the bright side thing. I heard this when my dad died. You got to have your dad for 19 years, right? I never even knew my dad. Okay, I'm really sorry that you never got to know your dad, but, and I'm still 19. I haven't gone through all this training yet. I don't know what to do. Okay? So I want to back up to here for a minute before I get to here. So I worked, when I was in Phoenix, living in Phoenix, I worked for a group called the New Song Center for Grieving Children. And we worked with kids, and we worked according to ages and type of loss. We had enough kids in the valley, sadly, to be able to group them. Sudden loss, anticipatory loss, loss of sibling, loss of parent, all that kind of stuff. And so one young boy was in my group, and his father had died suddenly at a construction accident. He fell into a hole. And so they were a young couple, right? The mom was about 25, 26, and this kid was about 7 or 8. And he wasn't talking, which is not all that unusual. So we were watching him, and we were, kind of seeing what was happening with him. And so finally, he pulls out a map of the city of Phoenix bus system from his backpack. And we're like, oh, what's that? And he said, well, I need you to help me find a job. And we're like, interesting, as our eyes are going, this is something, we're going to have progress. We're like doing the therapist dance. Something's going to happen, we're going to have a breakthrough. But, so he's like, I need to get a job. And we're like, oh, why do you need to get a job? And he said, what do you think he was told? You're going to be the man of the house now. So Daddy had a job. Daddy left the house every day and went to work. 8-year-old boy. So this is magical thinking. Children are all about the magical thinking. 8-year-old boy, very logically in child world, thinks, I can't drive. He knows this. So I better take the bus. So I'm going to take the bus and figure out where to go to get work. So he was carrying this inside of him for several months. Children frequently will not want to upset the surviving parent. So they'll keep stuff inside. Even if they don't know cognitively, they know primally that that surviving parent is the way that they are eating and staying warm. So they need to make sure that that surviving parent is okay. So they're not likely going to rock the boat. They may act out in different kinds of ways, but rarely is a 7-year-old kid going to, try to express their feelings to their surviving parent. They're not at a maturity level to be able to do that. But he internalized what he was given and prepared an action plan. So the things that we say to children have profound effects. This one here, they lost the battle with. So this one is particularly near and dear to my heart since being diagnosed with cancer. I've never heard the battle metaphor so much since until that occurred for me. And the challenge with, besides it being war language to use against your human body, which is a little disturbing to me, we don't say, if I were in a car accident on the way home, she lost her battle with the semi-truck. She got hit by a truck. That sure sucks. But I lost my battle with cancer. My father lost his battle with heart disease. What this is doing is implying two things that are very, very not healthy. The first one is that if that person had fought better, they could have won. So this goes back to the pathologizing of a natural part of the human life cycle, which is death. Now, I fought like hell when I had my cancer diagnosis, but I had a very good prognosis to start with. Everyone doesn't get that, and at some point, something's going to get me. And when that thing comes, there's not any fight I can throw up that I'm going to win in this context. The second thing that it does is it pits the people who have survived. So even though I'm not technically a survivor yet, you have to be 5 years out to be a survivor. Those of us who have survived, I did this better. I fought this battle better than those of you who screwed it up and failed. That's what it's saying underneath this language. If I could have one mission about talking about grief in my life, it would be to remove this battle language from the dying experience. It's not a battle. It's a passage. So when we talk about grief, it's really important to use age-appropriate terminology, but to use accurate terminology. When we don't use the word dead, especially around children, we set up more situations like the one where the child was looking to go through Phoenix with a bus route. Children become afraid to go to sleep. So, Daddy's sleeping now. Okay, when's he going to wake up? Okay. Children cannot, up until about age 12, they cannot fully comprehend the permanence of death. So it can be very, very challenging for the parent to have to keep redefining, well, when's Daddy coming home? When's Mommy coming home? What's happening? The child can't, time means very different things to a 6-year-old than it does to a 60-year-old. They can't get it. So when we use euphemisms, we're doing no one any favors. We're bliss yogiing out the experience. Dead is a perfectly useful word. It means what it means. When we can use the word, we can talk about it. If my dad only went to sleep, where does that leave any space for me to have a conversation about what happened? Be okay with saying nothing. That's super hard for a lot of us. Let the griever direct the conversation. They're not going to always want to talk about it. They're going to want to have a normal life. They're going to want to go out and just have coffee. And can't we just have coffee? But be the person who can allow them to have that doorway, have that space in to this conversation by being the one who keeps showing up. Be really mindful that your particular worldview or religion might not match the grievers. And it's not your space to put your worldview or religion into a griever's mindset. With children, you might have to redefine dead over and over and over and over again because it is so cognitively difficult for them to understand the permanence of death. Children do grieve differently than adults most of the time. Then they're usually way better at it because they haven't had 50 years of suppressing it. Children who are in a healthy, safe environment will process emotions as they occur if they've been allowed to do that. So a kid might have a temper tantrum in 1 minute and then be out playing and be happy. They might have a moment where they cry. They might then run out into the backyard and be like, yay, let's go to the zoo. And to an adult, they're like, nah, But that's what the kid is doing. I'm feeling this. I'm moving it through. The guest has come. I'm giving it tea. The guest is leaving now. Now we're going to have marshmallows. It's going to be great. With kids, it can help to maintain a structure, allowing them to play, to have space. If you're the parent, be aware that, like I said earlier, they might be taking extraordinary measures to protect your feelings. Try to let your kids know that you do want to hear from them, and if it's not safe for you to be able to do that because of where you are in your process, try to seek professional assistance. There are lots of free resources available. Allow them, and you as well, of course, to express your emotions as they come up in constructive ways. The griever, in a child too, but in an adult, they're still a fully formed human. And there's other things that they still have interest in, especially as grief makes that movement from being the oppressor to being the shadow to being the companion, to where they want to go out with their friends again. They want to go to the movies. They want to, just hang out. They want to go for a walk. They want to, whatever it was, where it's not front and center, because there's the time period where it's front and center, and then it begins to move, take on different shapes. Be alert for other challenges that might be a result of the loss. So like with this young boy and his family, so the father was the breadwinner in that particular family. So there was an extreme financial loss that occurred as well when the husband died. They were young, they didn't have any savings, they didn't have any life, they were in their early 20s, they were just starting life. So they lost their apartment. They had to move back in with her parents. So there can be all kinds of secondary losses as a result of the primary loss. Let the griever tell you that they don't want to do something and be okay with that. Don't I'm going to come with a net and drag you out of the house. You have to see the light of day. Okay? But keep calling, not in a stalky kind of way, but keep calling every 3 days, every 5 days, whatever your relationship was before, hang on to it after. Because what often happens is, for the griever, you've got these 2 weeks of incredible chaos where you have more chicken and pasta dishes and casseroles than you could possibly ever eat in a human lifetime, and everyone is in and out, and they're saying my other favorite thing not to ever say, if you need anything, call me. Because what that's doing is that's putting the responsibility, that's putting the onus on me to reach out to you. And you be a better friend than that. You reach out to me. You say, all right, Laraine, I'm going to call you when all the chaos is gone, I'm going to give you a call in a week. You cannot answer the phone. You can say no. I'm going to call you again in another week. Okay? And I guarantee you, people, I've heard this in many counseling sessions that I've led in my own experience, you figure out who your friends are super fast. And they're the ones who can sit with you when they can't fix it. Pay attention to radical changes like we talked about in behavior. Talked about kind of all of those. So, yeah, right? So, the cat is not doing a thing. He's not trying to take the cone off the dog's head. He's not saying, dude, this cone's not here. Let's pretend that this cone isn't here and your life isn't, oh my God. He's like, I'm just going to crawl in with this cone with you. We're going to take a nap. So the cat is adapting to the griever's world. The cat moved out of the regular world into the griever's extraordinary world. So this is an inevitable experience for us, grief is, right? It's if we live, if we love, if in any way we're going to experience these feelings. Life is about change. No one wishes that were not true more than me. I remember something my dad said when I was a teenager. He's like, you would wear the wrong pair of shoes your entire life just because they were familiar, rather than put on a pair of shoes that fit. And he was absolutely right, and I hear it to this day. I'm like, yep, you know what? I know how that shoe fits. I'm not going to try a new shoe because that one might fit somewhere different, and I don't know about that. I already got the blisters where these fit, and it's all fine. The energy that we spend avoiding this natural process is energy that is being taken away from engagement in life. When we talk about it, we have an opportunity to unpack our own fear and resistance and our own patterns. In case you haven't noticed, these things are on the uptick here. Addiction, suicide, depression, and anxiety. Okay. Avoiding feelings, over-medicating feelings, does not eliminate feelings. Okay? And I'm not going to be like, don't ever take meds or anything like that, but there is an over-prescribing issue, especially around grief, when it's treated like a pathology. Here, you're feeling anxious, you're feeling sad, have a pill. We got pills now for all of it. But what that really does is that defers the feeling. And it will come out eventually. So the final piece is this continuing bonds idea. And this is the warden's fourth step, to emotionally relocate the deceased and move on with life. And this is a really important part of the bereavement, so that's our noun, that's our space, our country, that allows the griever to maintain some sort of ongoing relationship with the deceased. In general, Western culture is not particularly good with honoring the ancestors, in general. Most other cultures are way better at this than we are. So ways that you can take a memory, take a special day, take a food item, take a special favorite place or a movie that you guys watch together, or something like that, and bring that into this now new world is what continuing bonds is about. And so good old existentialist Viktor Frankl, who is maybe he survived concentration camp and went on to be an amazing psychiatrist and philosopher. Having been is still a form of being. So if you know anything about grammar, this is the same word. It's just a different conjugation. It's just in a different space. So I'd like you to return for a minute to the person that you brought into the room in the beginning. Maybe think about some ways that you can work on this continuing bonds piece. Maybe there's things that you might still want to say, a letter, a card, even just a song, something like that. So a lot of times the people that we love flit in and out of our lives and our hearts and our minds at maybe inopportune moments. Maybe something on the radio triggers a memory, or odors are particularly good at triggering memory. Scent is one of our most powerful senses associated with memory. So a detergent, a perfume, a cologne, a type of food, those kind of things can be pretty quickly triggering. When our dead take time out of their busy lives to show up in our hearts and in our minds, it's really cool if we can meet them. So holding on to your person, and if this doesn't play, I'm going to just sing, which none of you want. You were my friend when you were here, and you're still my friend when you're wherever you went. And if I can extend my hand, they're going to extend their hand back. This is continuing bonds. This is when we have integrated the relationship that was into the relationship that currently is. And I would just close by saying what a profound and powerful and great gift it is to have loved. Thank you all very much for coming out today. Thank you.